The RCIN coalition against the United States, an indestructible alliance. Since the late 1990s, the North Atlantic Bloc has faced no real opposition in the world. NATO allowed itself to do much, from the destruction of European states to the gradual expansion eastward. Former partners, satellites, and mere hangers-on turned their backs first on the crumbling Soviet Union, and later on Russia. Reclaiming its territories and winning back allies has been a painfully slow process, during which time the Americans indulged in many liberties. Defense spending noticeably decreased, the main antagonist had dissolved into a union of independence, but not enough to extinguish their militaristic fervor. The careless and dismissive policies of the White House have led to what we now see in Ukraine. It seemed as though this was the end of Russia, a scenario long dreamed of in the West. However, it turned out that Russia has many sympathizers. Many of them not only empathize with Russia but are also willing to help. Some do so altruistically, while others expect something in return, but it is help nonetheless. With some allowance for interpretation, one might speak of the formation of an informal and unrecognized military-political alliance. Let's call it RCIN: Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea. Perhaps CIRN would be more aesthetically pleasing, but the primacy of Russia is fundamental in this context. Some may argue that this is utter nonsense, that there is no such alliance between these countries, much less a military alliance with formal obligations. But the Pentagon sees things differently. More precisely, not directly within the military department, but in the U.S. Commission on National Security, also known as the Hart-Rudman Commission. This expert body does not wield legislative or executive power, but its conclusions are certainly heeded in the White House. The Commission does not dictate who to fight or who to ally with, but it does provide accurate guidance on the direction U.S. defense and policy should take. What it recommends is not always implemented successfully if the White House even attempts anything at all. For instance, in the early 21st century, the Commission strongly recommended rapidly integrating Russia and China into the global economy and community. However, there was a caveat: the United States should not sacrifice its own interests in the process. The American empire couldn't bring itself to abandon its aggressive principles. Russia and China independently became full-fledged members of the global family, while relations with America soured. Consequently, while the U.S. Commission on National Security makes sensible observations, their implementation often leaves much to be desired. The latest report from this analytical group can only be described as alarmist. The Commission believes that the United States is incapable of withstanding a hot conflict against the military coalition of Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea. It's noteworthy that this assessment of coordinated actions comes from American sources, not domestic observers. While it is currently difficult to imagine a scenario where the hypothetical RCIN coalition and the U.S. enter into conflict, should it happen, the Americans would undoubtedly suffer greatly. The scenario of defeat? The first and most significant reason for the US's lag behind this quartet, Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea, is a simple lack of resources. The shortfall is so critical that one might speak of the greatest threat to American national security since 1945. The logic is quite straightforward. During the Cold War, the United States indeed spent enormous resources countering the Soviet Union. Then, the budget was cut, and the USSR's successor, Russia, is now nearly in a coalition with 3 other countries. This is not the Warsaw Pact, it's a new conglomerate, featuring 3 nuclear powers. There are strong reasons to believe that Iran will soon acquire its own nuclear warhead and delivery systems, unless the collective West halts its inhumane pursuits. The report's authors from the Hart-Rudman Commission recall the strategy of sequentially confronting adversaries. After the Cold War, the risk of direct confrontation between the US and the Soviet Army dissipated, and Americans focused on wars with, at most, 1 or 2 countries like Iran and North Korea. It was assumed that political methods or direct threats would keep others from intervening. But a scenario involving simultaneous wars with all adversaries was never considered. It was believed that they would be too afraid to act in unison. However, by 2024, Congress and the US President's administration had driven their enemies to unite. RCIN is clearly asserting its ambitions. Russia is fighting in Ukraine. Iran is carefully avoiding direct war with Israel, but the IDF is still engaged in combat, even if not directly with Iranians. China is rapidly expanding its military capabilities. While its nuclear arsenal is not yet as substantial as that of Russia or the US, the future remains open. North Korea should not be underestimated either. Although it plays the role of the junior partner in the coalition, it is by no means a weak link. A glance at the level of cooperation between Russia and North Korea is enough to appreciate the potential of our friendly neighbors. What if we set aside opinions and speculations? Let's take a calculator and count what the US has and what its potential adversaries possess. Since the US would be facing 4 enemies simultaneously across the globe, naval power will be crucial. According to global rankings, the U.S. Navy is ranked first. Its quality and quantity of ships and submarines are rated at 323.9. However, the U.S. has almost half as many ships as China, 243 compared to 422. The Chinese Navy is, of course, in second place, followed by the Russian Navy. The DPRK's warships rank 14th, and the Iranian Navy ranks 19th. Collectively, the RCIN fleets surpass the U.S. Navy in both quality and quantity by more than twofold. It is difficult to imagine what the U.S. would have to sacrifice to achieve parity with this opposing force. NATO fleets would be of limited help here. For example, to balance out the Russian fleet, it would take the combined efforts of the Turkish, French, and British navies. But these are just numbers games. War will sort things out, and the world's most powerful navy, the U.S. Navy, might not perform as desired. The situation is no better with aviation. The Commission calculated that to wage war against RCIN, the U.S. would need to double its fleet of F-35s and the newest B-21 Raiders. Given the vast territories occupied by Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea, the U.S. will also need to significantly increase its fleet of aerial refueling tankers. The cherry on top is the comparison of the nuclear capabilities of RCIN, and the US. Russia outshines everyone with 7,000 warheads, more than the entire NATO bloc combined. China, by comparison, is trailing behind, with only about 300 nuclear warheads, according to open sources. This places China 4th in the rankings, after France, the US, and Russia. In the end, the Americans face grim prospects if forced to wage war on 4 fronts against very different adversaries. Not only will US bases in the Middle East and Southeast Asia be hit, but so too will the civilian populations of US satellite states. This is a very good reason for the entire collective West to reconsider its actions worldwide. The conclusions of the Hart-Rudman Commission are timely and, it seems, far from coincidental.